Hey, welcome to Shaders, Lights, and Cameras. In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at the basic shaders that Maya has, the ones that are most commonly used for shading objects in Maya. And we're going to take a look at creating lights and cameras. Right, so the first thing you want to do when you're starting to work with shading and texturing is change your Maya menu set to rendering. So rendering sort of encompasses shading, lighting, and texturing. And then you see your menu changes up here. So the first thing we're going to do is just create some polygon spheres just to demonstrate. If we go to our polygons shelf here, we can easily create them just by clicking on the sphere. Or you can go to create polygons and choose sphere here. Let's just slide it over in X. So just space them apart. We can just drag a box over all of these and move them up so they're on top of the grid. If you hit spacebar, you can go to your 4-panel view. Now let's create a floor. So we're going to create a polygon plane. And we'll scale that up. You can use your scale tool here in the toolbar or just hit R on the keyboard for your scale. And we'll just move it up just slightly above the grid, just so they're touching the spheres. You can intersect them a little bit just to make sure that they're actually touching. This is so that the balls won't look like they're hovering when we apply the shadows. Alright, so now let's create a camera. You can go to the rendering shelf here. It has some of the options that we need for rendering. But let's just go to create a camera, because there's different options that we have here in the menu set. So you can go to camera, there's camera and aim and up. These two bottom ones just give you an extra node to aim the camera, but we don't really need those. So we're just going to go to the first one, just create camera. And it's going to create a camera right at the origin, as usual. So let's just drag that back a little bit and move it up. For now, we're going to move the camera in a few minutes. Just want to create all our elements first. Alright, so now let's change our layout. In the toolbar here, underneath the top set of tools for moving and rotating and scaling your objects, we have a couple of interface presets. So let's just choose this one here. So we have two panels at the top. This is just an easier way to work. So we have our perspective view here now. And now that we have a camera in the scene, we can change this to our camera view. And this will show us what the camera is actually seeing. So we'll go to panels, perspective, and now we have this option for camera 1. Click on that, and now we're seeing, this panel is seeing through this camera. And it's always a good idea, once you have a camera created, you can go to view, under camera settings, and let's choose resolution gate. This gives us our camera framing. Inside this square is what we'll be seeing in the final render. And you can see here it says 960 by 540. Let's change it to 720 HD. And the way you do that is to go to our render settings right here. And in here we can change, there's a lot of things we can change, but right now we're just going to focus on under image size, where it says presets. You can see it says HD 520, and that's the resolution we have here. Let's just change this to HD 720. Just so it's not too big when we try to render it, it won't take as long. And as soon as you click on HD 720, you can see it changes up here. So it's 1280 by 720 pixels. So we'll just close that up for now. And let's move our camera. When we move our camera in the perspective view, you can see it actually changes what it's seeing in the camera panel here. I just want to get an angle on it and see the results of what we're about to do. And so that's good for now. Now it's a good idea to key the camera. Just hit S on your keyboard. And you'll see right at frame 1 we get a red keyframe there. So just in case we move the camera by accident, if you click anywhere on your timeline, it'll snap right back to frame 1. Right, so all the options for shading and texturing are done in the Hypershade. So go to Windows, go to your rendering editors, and then you'll see it here, Hypershade. It's also available right here, right next to the render settings. Open up your Hypershade, and here we have it in a separate window. But I'm just going to close that for a second. We can change our layout by going to any one of the panel menus in any one of the panels. It doesn't really matter which one you go to. You can change your interface layout this way as well. So let's just go to layouts and let's choose 3 panels split right. So that just gives us one big one on the left, on 2 on the right. Let's actually change this one to our Hypershade by going to panels again, and you can go to panels and Hypershade. So now it's over here, and this is our camera 1 and this is our perspective. You can organize this any way you like. We really want to be able to see this workspace and this list of shaders here. Okay, so by default, when you create objects in Maya, you can see that they already have a shader on them, this gray shader. This Lambert 1 is automatically applied to these shaders when you create them in Maya. So let's actually create some other shaders. Usually we disregard this one and create all new shaders for things that we're creating in Maya. So the Lambert 1 won't really be used. It's only there for a default shader for creating objects right off the bat. So let's actually create another Lambert shader. It's automatically named Lambert 2, and let's just rename it. You can right click on it and go down to rename, or you can just click on it and go over to the channel box here. It says Lambert 2. You can just click on that and rename it. I'm just going to name it Lambert. Shaders that are most commonly used for props, characters, any kind of objects in a scene are the Lambert, anisotropic, blend, and Fong. So let's create a few more. We'll create one for anisotropic. It's already named anisotropic 1. We can just leave it like that. Let's create one for blend. And we'll create another one for Fong. Okay, so you can see from the examples here in the Hypershade that the Lambert captures no light whatsoever, reflects no light, so it doesn't have any highlight on it. And the anisotropic has swirly highlight, and the blend has a very dull highlight, and the Fong has a sharp highlight. It's a little hotter. Usually skin starts with a blend shader. Fong could be used for any kind of plastic or glass, and anisotropic, the same thing. It could be used for car paint or even plastic objects as well. So let's just change the colors of all these first, and then we'll apply each one of these to a sphere, and we'll check the results. So let's change our Lambert. We'll change it to red. Change the anisotropic to green. And we'll change the blend. We'll change it to this light blue color. Fong we can change to this magenta color here. Alright, so just hit enter on the keyboard to get rid of the color swatch. Alright, so now to apply these shaders to the objects, click on the object, right click over your Lambert and go assign material to selection. You can see immediately it turns red. The other way to do it is to select the object that you want to apply the shader to, and you can middle mouse button drag it over to the object and release. So we'll put the blend on this sphere here, and we'll put the Fong on this one here. You can change the colors of the shaders on any one of these objects just by clicking on the color swatch, and you can change the colors this way. You can see it update. And there's a whole bunch of other common attributes here. You can change the transparency. If you drag the transparency down, you can see that it totally disappears, or you can have it as transparent as you like. Ambient color, incandescence, you can see the result. It's just the way that it actually captures the light. And there's a whole bunch of other options down here too, which we'll take a closer look at in a few minutes. Alright, so before we start adding lights, let's take a look at what we have here so far. Right up here we have our render current frame. So whichever frame that you're on down here in the timeline, this button will render that frame. We'll just keep it on frame 1 for now because we don't have any animation going on or anything. So we'll just click on that and it'll give us a separate window here. So this is what we have so far. So in Maya, there's a set of default lights that are being used to light this scene. And we don't want to use those default lights to light our scene, so we have to actually create our own lights. But this is where we go whenever we want to check to see how our scene's looking as we're shading and texturing. Just to check the progress to see how it actually is going to look when it's finished. We always want to use the render current frame to check and see how it's looking. I'm just going to minimize this for now. So I'm just going to show you how to do a basic lighting setup. It's very similar to what photographers might use if you're getting family portraits done or something like that. So this is what a basic lighting setup looks like. So you have your key light, your fill light, and then a rim light in the back, just to include some backlighting. Alright, so to create lights in our rendering shelf here, we have all the lights here that we can click on and create. You can also go to create under lights. Lights that are most commonly used are directional lights, and I would say directional lights and spotlights. So we'll hit the directional light, and you can see we get a directional light down here. Now you should move things around. We already have our camera set here. This is the camera angle that I want to keep. So I wouldn't move anything around in the camera view. You can actually lock the camera if you want. If you go to your channel box, you can actually lock all the translates and rotates. If you right click on them and go lock selected. And that way you won't be able to rotate or pan in the camera view anymore. Always good practice just to work in the perspective view to move things around. So let's hit W on our keyboard for the move tool and start moving our directional light into place. And I'm just going to put it to the side here. We're going to create a key light here. So this is going to be our brightest light. That's going to create most of the light on our spheres. So let's just move it up and angle it down toward the spheres. Right, so now if you want to see the result of that light, let's go to our render view. And you want to make sure the camera panel is highlighted. You don't have to hit the render button again up here in the interface. You can do it right in this render view panel. And you can see the result. Now that we have these lights, it's kind of hard to see on this blend sphere. So I want to change the color of that just a little bit. But this is a good opportunity to show you the render region options. So if we go to the render region option, you can click on this and we can specify an area just to see the changes that just in that area instead of rendering the whole thing. So let's change the color altogether here. We'll make it this dark blue color. Click on the render region button. So this comes in really handy when you're working on a character and you're just working on the face, for example, the face textures, and you just want to see the difference in the face and you don't want to render out the entire frame. So we'll just minimize that for now. Let's select our directional light for a minute and let's take a look at some of the attributes for our lights. So all the lights have this shadow area where you can turn shadows on. There's depth map shadows and ray trace shadows. Let's turn depth map shadows on just so you can see what they look like. Let's go back to our render view again and we'll click on our render button. Not render region, but just the regular render button. And now you can see that that light is producing shadows on all these objects. So notice the real hard difference between light and shadow here. It's really dark. And that's why a classic lighting setup is used, just to eliminate any really dark shadows and just get more of an even lighting. I'm going to create another directional light, and this time I'm just going to click it here in the rendering shelf. And we'll drag that one back a little bit. Just put it opposite to the first camera that we created. So let's go to our render view again, and we can hit render again. So now we have two highlights on each object, and that's because we have two lights in the scene. And you can see our dark shadows are no longer dark, they're filled in. But now the scene's way too bright. So that second light is our fill light. So let's just minimize this for a minute. If we go to the first light and we look in the attributes, I click on the attribute editor, we can see that the intensity is at 1. That's what it comes in by default, and that's a pretty good intensity for a key light. If we go to the second light, it's also at 1 because that's what it comes in by default. Let's tone it down to 0.25 and hit enter. You can see it shows you right here that the light diminishes a little bit. So if we render that again, you can see that the shadows changed a little bit. Let's use our render region option and make the changes that way. So if I crank this way up high just to demonstrate, and we hit our render region option, let's bring it back down to say 0.15 and click on render region again. And you can see the difference between what it was on these other objects and what it is now. Before, the shadow was really black, and now it's just filling in the shadow a little bit, just with a little bit of light. Let's add a rim light to complete our basic lighting setup, and we'll just use another directional light. Again, working on our perspective view, and we'll bring this back a little bit. Press F on the keyboard, we can focus in on it, and you can see it's pointing away from our objects. We want to rotate that around. You can just do it manually here. If you want to be precise, you can go to your channel box and set this to 180. And that just turns it around 180 degrees, which is halfway around. And we'll just point that down a little bit at our objects. So let's see what that did. So the point of a rim light is just to create a bit of a backlighting, just to highlight the objects a little bit better. And you can see that it's really bright. Let's select the render region. And we'll hit the attribute editor for our rim light. And we can just drag this down with the slider. Hit render region again and see the difference. So we wouldn't use a rim light for a character lighting rig, but for any kind of environmental scenes, that might be something you'd want to use. Alright, so let's try creating a spotlight and see how that works. So in the rendering shelf, we'll just click on the spotlight here. It looks like a flashlight, and we can drag that up. It's pointing toward the back of our scene, so we'll just rotate that down. And you can type in -90 degrees. Let's just move it up a little bit. And let's render that to see how it looks. You can see that it just creates this pool of light. Now a spotlight is something we will use in a character rig to create the shadows. And right now you can see that we turn shadows on for our key light. Normally in a character lighting rig we'd want the shadows to be directly underneath the character. We select our key light and go to our attribute editor. We'll just uncheck depth map shadows for the key light, and I'll turn shadows on for the spotlight. And now if we render that again, we'll see that the shadows are being cast straight down. And we'll take a closer look at our spotlight. You can see that it's only creating a small pool of light here, and that's because of the cone angle. We can increase the cone angle. If we drag that slider, you can see that it gets a lot bigger. And if we render that, it should cover a much larger area. So it basically covers our entire scene, and it's casting shadows in all directions here. It's sort of cascading out. Say if this was our character here, we'd want the shadow underneath him just like that. So back in the attribute editor for the spotlight, under resolution, you can see how our shadow is kind of pixelated. So if we turn up our resolution and change our filter size to say 2 or 3, it will increase the render time, but it'll improve the quality of the shadows by quite a bit. So if we render that again, you can see our shadows are a lot crisper. You can also change the shadow color, but normally you'd want to leave that on black. You can also create new shaders and apply them to separate faces on the polygon objects. Let's create a new shader. So any one of these, we'll just use another blend. So if we double click on this new blend 2 shader and I change the color to say yellow. So I'll go to my sphere with the anisotropic shader on it, and I'll right click, and you can go to faces, choose face, and you can select specific faces. And we'll go to that new blend we just created, and we can choose assign material to selection. And we'll hit F8 to get back into object mode, and you can see that you can actually assign shaders to individual faces on any object. So that comes in handy at times as well. Let's render a region to see the difference. Just take a look at some of the common material attributes. You can adjust transparency. So if I put that down to about half, for example, let me render that. We'll just render a region to see the difference, or just have it showing a little bit. Ambient color, it basically increases the brightness of the object. Diffuse makes it darker and brighter. Translucence doesn't really make much of a difference on a Lambert object. Some of these other attributes are just, they don't make much of a difference for a Lambert because it doesn't capture that much light. Let's go to the blend, for example. Blend is often used for skin on characters as a base shader. So let's select a region around the blend. But the ones with highlights have the specular shading options, which do make a difference. So under eccentricity, you can see in the sample here, it basically makes the highlight larger. So if I drag eccentricity up and we'll render a region there, you can see that the highlights cover a much larger area. Specular roll-off, you can basically decrease and increase how much highlight that it has. It makes the highlight a little bit hotter and brighter. If you're applying this to a character, for example, because skin doesn't have a really hot highlight on it, you'd want the highlight to be a little bit bigger and the specular roll-off to be a little bit less. You'd want it to be a very soft highlight. So let's take a look at the Fong. It's very similar attributes, except we have cosine power, and that's basically the size of the highlight. And then we have specular color. You can change the color of the highlight. And then the same thing, we have reflectivity and reflective color. So these are attributes that you would usually just play with and adjust a little bit just to get the desired look. When we're rendering lighting in Maya, we want to have the highest quality of shadows we can. So you can see that these depth map shadows, they're very evenly shaded, and it's not considered a very high quality of shadow. So we'd want something a little bit of a better quality. So we'll use mental ray lighting. So mental ray is a plugin. It's a rendering plugin for Maya. So to get that, you'd have to go to the Autodesk website, and I have it already opened up on my second monitor here. So this is the URL. But if you can't find it, do a Google search for Mental Ray plugin for Maya 2016. Something like that would work, whichever Maya version that you're using. So I would download this one here, this Mental Ray plugin for Maya 2016 for Windows, because I'm using Windows. They have it for OS X and Linux as well. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded that. After you've downloaded the Mental Ray plugin, you need to load it into the plugin manager. So to get to that, you go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and we'll open up Plugin Manager. And you can just expand that a little bit. I already have it loaded here. It's called Maya Tomer MLL, and you want to click to have that loaded, and you can also click Auto Load. And once it's in there, I'll show you how to bring this in a minute, but once you have it loaded in and you go to your render settings, you see where it says render using Maya software. Well, instead of using the Maya software, you want to render using Mental Ray, and this option will pop up once you have it loaded into your plugin manager. So if I click on that, now we have a whole new set of options here. We have a bunch of different tabs that we can configure, which I'll go over in just a few minutes. First, let's load the Maya plugin into the plugin manager. After you've downloaded the Mental Ray plugin for Maya, go to your downloads folder or wherever it saves it to. First, you'll need to install it. So you double click on this and install the Mental Ray plugin. Okay, so you can see here in my plugins manager, you can see that there's a path here for different plugins. But you'll want to put this one in the C program files, Autodesk Mental Ray for Maya 2016 /plugins. I'm just going to go to that directory. So you can see here I have a Mental Ray for Maya 2015 and a Mental Ray for Maya 2016. So you'll want to go into your downloads folder. So after you've installed the Mental Ray plugin, you want to make sure that you find this folder. You can do a search on your computer for it. But you want to make sure that you find this Mental Ray for 2016 folder and make sure that it's in this path under C Program Files Autodesk. And then if you double click to go in this folder, you'll see that in Plugins, and then you'll see the Maya Tomer.mll. That's where it exists, and that's where you search for it in Maya here. So I'll just leave that up so we can see the directory. I already have it loaded in mine, but if you go to Browse, if you don't have it loaded in yours, you can go to Browse and just search for it. Your C Program Files, Autodesk, and then Mental Ray for Maya 2016, Plugins, and then you simply click on this and click on Open. I won't do it now because I already have it loaded, but once you do that, it should pop up here. And then you just want to check Loaded, check on Auto Load. You may have to restart Maya again. Once you've loaded it in, you should be able to open up your render settings here and change this from Maya software to Mental Ray. You should see this new option appear right at the bottom, Mental Ray. After you've installed the Mental Ray plugin, if you're having trouble locating this folder, you need to find the Mental Ray for Maya 2016 folder. If you can't find it in program files, it may be just here in your C drive under an Autodesk, and then you'll see Mental Ray plugin for Maya 2016. If you click on that, and then you go into program files here under Autodesk, you can find it here, Mental Ray for Maya 2016, and you'll want to copy that. Just copy it and back out and move it to your, instead of being in Autodesk, you want it to be in program files, Autodesk, and then you want to paste it here. You can see I've already done that here, and that's where you want to navigate to get it, and make sure it's in this directory here. Alright, so we're going to want to configure some of the settings for the Mental Ray options. Now you can see under Common, it gives us a lot of the similar ones it does for Maya software. It allows us to choose a frame extension. So if you were rendering out a series of frames, you'd want it to be on name.number.extension. That way it gives us frame 1, 2, 3, etc. And then the extension would be whatever image file type you're using. You'd give it a name up here. Frame padding of 4. You're probably not going to go over 4 digits, or you might want to set it to 5. Start frame, end frame, the way it is now, would only render frame 1 to 10. So you can specify however long your scene is here. Render cameras, so we'd want to change this to camera 1. And alpha channel, that gives us our transparency. So you'd want all the images to have a transparency on them in case you want to do some compositing later. Then this is your image size, so we have it set to HD 720, and that's fine. Okay, under quality, you just want to make sure your overall quality is at 0.25, so it's not too big. Again, if this is for demo reel purposes, this is fine. Under advanced sampling, you want to change this to final gather if it's not already on that. So under filtering, you want to expand that and change this to Mitchell. It just seems to work better, and make sure these filter sizes are on 4. Head down to where it says final gathering and make sure that's checked. It should already be checked when you change the final gathering up above. But let's change the accuracy to 500 and make sure point density is on 1. Point interpolation, we can leave that at 20. We only want to cast shadows from the spotlight. So let's select the spotlight, go to your attribute editor, and underneath shadows, we want to make sure depth map shadows is not checked. We're gonna turn on ray trace shadows, and you want to set ray trace shadows to 2.8. Set shadow rays to 30 and ray depth limit to 1. And then just go to your other lights and make sure none of the other shadows are being used. We don't want to use shadows on any of these other lights, these directional lights that are around it. So this one's checked, just make sure it's unchecked. Now I'm just going to quickly create a polygon cube just to demonstrate how the shadows will fall off. Alright, we're going to do a quick render of that. Now that we've changed some of the Mental Ray settings, it takes a little longer to render. Alright, so you can see now that the shadows are much smoother. As objects are closer to the ground, they're a little darker. You can see how they blur as objects get farther away from the ground. So Mental Ray lighting is just smoother and better quality overall. Alright, now you can see here our spheres have this odd lighting on them, and that's really just because of the Mental Ray lighting gives us reflectivity now. Go back to our Hypershade and we'll select that Fong. It's just an unappealing look, so we'll just turn reflectivity to 0. And if I render that now, that looks a lot better. Alright, so I brought a couple of extra objects into the scene. They're just hovering above the ground there, and I did a render of that just to demonstrate how the shadows drop off, and it just gives a nice effect. There's one more shader I want to show you, and it's called the Use Background shader. So we'll just click on that, and we're going to apply it to our ground plane. Middle mouse button, drag it over to our plane to apply it. And you can see that it disappears. It's using the background environment as the shader. So if we render that, so you can see you get a pretty cool effect, and it's actually using the background, the black environment, or the black background, as the shader for the ground plane. So let's select the camera, just scroll down till you see environment, the environment settings, and you can see that the background color is set to black. So if we change it to white, for example, and you can tone the brightness down a little bit. Then of course you can give it any kind of color you want, but we'll just go with like an off-white for now. And if we render that again, so you can see that gives us an interesting effect. We just changed it to white and we have these reflections, but what I'm going for is just to have the shadows. I don't want to have the reflections, I just want to have shadows, and I want to have my image plane match the background. If we select the Use Background shader and we just get rid of the reflection limit, set to 2 right now. If we just bring it to 0 and render that again, now we just have this nice expanse where we can just do some animation examples, and it's just a great way to demonstrate some character animation on your demo reel or to display your models If you want to do a model turnaround, nice white plain environment, just so nothing else is distracting from what you're trying to demonstrate on your demo reel. So that's it for basic shading, lighting, and cameras. In the next class, we're going to take a look at how to build a character lighting rig so that the character will be evenly lit anywhere they go in the scene.